turn it for a
Sure.
tiny bit, and if it's like, yeah, we don't have to go there because I can just explore it on my own as well. So, can you see it, the blue?
Yes, I see it.
Yeah. So just, I was thinking about what, falsehoods and dead ends. Like this section was about, other people, but I guess you can substitute that for philosophy or thinking methods can make a man's cognitive task easier or more difficult,
Yeah.
or confuse him with falsehoods and dead ends. Wouldn't it? Like, I'm just trying to think, and in my mind, like, what good examples of dead ends. So one would be, I don't know how to give this one word, but one would be is you constantly try to get beneath things. So like you don't even accept, or you're not even aware of such a thing as axioms there to guardrail your thoughts. And so you might be like, well, how do you know that's true? You don't know that like, and you just keep going in circles. Or um, that might be one example I thought of. I don't know what to call that. Like, because you don't have, is that a dead end? I don't know, but
I would say so. That's extreme skepticism.
yeah, okay.
Like
Uh,
skepticism can be good, like, yeah, question what you hear. But if that can, without the right grounding, that could actually confuse you more. To
mm-hmm.
be skeptical doesn't mean you question everything. Do you question that you exist? I mean, then that's a whole different level of doubt, like
Yeah,
doubting you even exists. And that can be very confusing. And that's, yeah, so yeah, that would be a good example.
right. You get into like infinite regress, right? You're not able to actually think because you're constantly questioning, and then there's no start point to anything.
More or less, yeah, that sounds right. But
And
that's an
then
example of confusing from another person, like from the outside, making it worse.
And then with something like God, for example, what about a torturous questioning process of like, does God exist or not? As like, I guess the key underlying idea there is acceptance of the arbitrary. I don't know if that's actually what you call it, but
It would be a form of dead end. I guess it depends what way you believe in God. There's so many ways to believe in God, but it could be like a dead end. Like you can never find an answer. Is really what objective thinking would say. There, like it's not even a valid question. So of course we're going to be asking it. There will never be a right or wrong answer. You'll forever ask, and it'll be forever a dead end with a
yeah,
confusing falsehood.
it's similar to the skepticism with the infinite regress.
Yes.
Cool. Yeah, we can
Or
maybe
even
skip
like
that.
maybe as far as conspiracy theories, like how do we know man really landed on the moon? Is it, can we believe that the earth is actually round? Like somebody could just introduce that idea of doubt, like, hmm, the flag on the moon isn't blowing in the wind. It's up like it's in the wind. Well, that's impossible. We should doubt it entirely.
Right. And then although with a conspiracy that might be like its own, might be compartmentalized more easily.
Right. That could be another issue, but that's still more the idea that the way others can actually, the knowledge or even the thinking of others can make your cognitive task even more difficult than it would be otherwise by introducing you that idea and making you consider these falsehoods and arbitrary concepts and thinking.
And then in terms of thinking methods, I thought of one very concrete, less like those things are they're still there, but they're further away. Is like just um, accepting the arbitrary in terms of like, oh, what does this person think of me? And getting into these thought loops. This is more of a personal example because I used to do this, but like getting into these mental thought loops that don't really have a logical start point. They're just created from emotions. That would be,
Yeah,
I think, a good example of a dead end. I guess that I don't know what you'd call that thinking method apart from accepting the arbitrary, but I think that's an example.
yeah, I think that's a good way to phrase it. Accepting the arbitrary. I do know
Cool.
what that's like too. So many
Yeah.
people do actually. So I mean, that's a
Yeah.
good example of it.
Um, cool. I mean, I feel like we've done a lot of concretes there, so that's great. Let's go to the next.
Yes, that was
Uh,
great.
um, This is again, a lot of these are just curiosities rather than, I think, essential to the learning. But let's go ahead and explore them briefly and see what happens. The
Yeah.
steps of human progress have not been of a succession of equal microscopic contributions in every field, from philosophy to music to science to invention. There have been a few giants whose ideas were the great turning points, followed by many lesser men who elaborated some details of the giants' discoveries. My curiosity about this is that, like obviously when I think of Newton or I don't know, Einstein, I'm like giant. But today I can't think of who's a giant. Like, um,
I think
or Aristotle.
Stephen
Aristotle.
Hawking sometimes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, Aristotle would be an example. Just the giants of thinking
Do you think
that he
that's
was.
true? Is that in like even in psychology, in your like I'm just getting your observations on this in your field. Do you feel like this is what the statement is true? Because I've heard
I
many people
do.
say the opposite.
I do. I mean, I agree that there's some people who are just, there's a lot of small contributions that they're not irrelevant, they matter, but they don't shift as much. They don't have that much of an impact, only because like such a narrow, focused thing that they researched, which
Mm,
may have been wonderful to research, but it doesn't like change the field. It doesn't change the way of thinking. It doesn't cause a shift in the way concepts are treated in field. Like Newton really shifted how concepts were used within physics and science. Like he
uh,
came up with a whole new language for physics.
yeah.
Basically, or say Freud, whether or not you consider him valid, his discovery is valid. That's a sort of, they have a big impact on the field because they introduce a lot of concepts that have a lot of impact on the field, that have a lot of considerations in it. Same with philosophy. Like Aristotle came up with a whole lot of concepts
Yeah, the guy was a
that they,
genius for sure.
yeah, and things like that. And I do think really you can only come up with examples. I can't say in principle why it would be necessarily.
Right.
Just that progress has to be made and can be made in these big steps. That's really acknowledging the conceptual work that an individual has to do. I
Do
think
you
that's the main distinction about objectivism, saying there's a
do
lot of individual work you need to do to create concepts, not just taking what somebody else built had created. Like you're really doing hard work here.
um Also, do you think that, like, I get there's Aristotle, Einstein, Newton, whatever. That's all I can think of at the moment. But do you feel like today there's less of these giants? Because you'd think there's a bigger population. There should be giants all over the place. Where are they?
I I think there are more of them, so it's kind of just
Oh, okay.
gets a bit washed out of it. Like
Yeah, okay.
there's more of them, but in a way, just saying, well, that's science is changing a lot quickly. So in a way, you could say it's just happening really fast. That
Right.
there's a lot of work going on, and say, I mean, the guy who wrote Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman, he would be a pretty big thinker in psychology.
Mhm.
But and sure, plenty people never heard of him, even
Yeah.
though he had a big impact on, I think, thinking about cognitive science and
Right.
decision making.
Okay. Well, that's encouraging. That's cool. I'm excited to start reading some New Scientist or something like that. See what I find in there.
Yeah,
All right.
some academics definitely disagree. They do see it more as a collective enterprise,
Yeah,
but
I've heard
that's really a
that a lot.
philosophical difference.
Yeah. Um, cool. So I think just to give context of this chapter, reason as an attribute of the individual. So that's the context, right, to this,
Right.
because it's relevant to this next question.
Yes.
This brings us to the final conclusion about man. If reason is an attribute of the individual, and if the choice to think or not controls all of man's other choices and their products, including emotions he feels and actions he takes, then the individual is sovereign. That's my interest. Is this like some integration of all this information, like the fact that reason is an attribute of the individual and the point of the main choice you make is the one to think or not, and then it also affects your emotions. The integration of all of that is to call someone a sovereign. Is this sort of where he's going with this? Because I didn't really get what.
Yeah, like all the things you talked about in the chapter, like free will, the choice to focus, purpose, what other things?
Well,
Acknowledge reality, reason as an attribute of individuals. Even the fact about like,
emotions as
yeah,
well being
just taking
coded.
all those as an integration of
Okay, because
things he's been talking about.
yeah, and the fact that it says here, you can see I highlighted self-created, self-directed. Okay, so basically this is his own concept that he's formed, and he's saying it's like it's an integration of all of this. So when he says sovereign, that's what he means.
Yeah, he's just saying they think for themselves, they act for themselves, they seek their goals for themselves, that sort
What
of
like,
thing.
and why is he? What's the point of this? Do I find out later? Like, why is he calling it a sovereign? It
Well,
just seems kind of
I
like,
think that's just a literary thing here,
oh,
just
okay,
for
or
effect.
oh, okay, all right, cool. So maybe I got caught up on nothing there.
Yeah, it's just for effect. But he's
Okay,
just
all right.
saying we are individuals, and this is what it means to be an individual. And this is what kind of individual is. We're not like parts of a collective, or
Yeah,
others don't think for us.
yeah.
So
Um, actually, I can. So this is about the reason emotion dichotomy. Um, reason emotion dichotomy, however, cuts off this possibility of identifying the cause of the emotions by teaching that emotions are independent of thought. It makes permanent the feeling of metaphysical helplessness. That's pretty strong.
mhm.
Um, it is essential to most variants of determinism. It is the most potent weapon determinists have in gaining converts. This question, so um,
Mhm.
I think we can skip, or maybe we can touch on, because I do cover it in the reason chapter, I remember. um, right, let's skip it because I cover it in the reason chapter.
Okay.
Okay, off topic from the paragraph, but once you establish a reason, emotion, harmony, you need psychology to step in, right? Like it's no longer philosophy you're now dealing with. All right, if you do theorize that emotions are linked to reason, then now you need psychology to come in and detail that process out, how one goes about changing it and whatever.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Um, why is this? Oh, okay. Yeah, I didn't quite see the link between like why do they need why is a false theory of emotion so potent to determinism? Like, um, maybe my question is worded badly, but like what difference would it make how where your emotions come from if you're just saying everything, if everyone is determined? Um,
Let's see. I'm not really sure what he means. It's
hmm,
a bit, seems like a very strong claim.
yeah.
Like, I don't, let me look at the context in the book itself. Let's see. See if we can figure this out. 203.
It may be a different page than yours, so you might search just the text if you copy paste.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I
what are
see.
your what are your thoughts on permanent makes permanent the feeling of metaphysical helplessness? If
I mean,
you
that part I agreed with, at
can
least.
you and how do you detail can you detail that out for me? And like in what sense does it make you like what does it look like to be on to have a reason emotion dichotomy and be metaphysically helpless or
Well,
give a feeling of metaphysical helplessness?
well, for one, we would say it's a false dichotomy that you don't choose one or the other. So then you have to think about, well, what if somebody did buy into the dichotomy? What would that mean if they're the way they're thinking against reality? Like, in this sense, reason and emotion are not integrated. Saying like emotions are their thing, thinking is its thing. They never cross. They're unrelated. Or it could be like if you're thinking, ignore your emotions because your thinking has no bearing on them, or vice versa. That only listen to your emotions because thinking is disconnected from who you are, or something like that. And you'll be always in conflict because you're either trying to deal with your emotions separate from your thinking, or dealing with thinking separate from emotions. So you'll always be caught like never figuring it out. You feel helpless because you're not really working with everything very well.
And okay, I guess also
It's my dog.
yeah. I guess yeah, okay. So also there's the conflict, and then assuming sometimes your emotions will be wrong and inaccurate, there is that you would experience that doubt because you don't know like what's true, what's not true. Like if you go with your emotion, it might be true and then your thinking is wrong, but you know your emotions can also be wrong because you've probably experienced that they're not entirely reflecting reality at all times. And so there's that comes with it too. Like, do you go with the gut instinct or do you go with your thinking?
Yeah, and when you don't integrate them, it can cause problems. Like you want to try to think of them together is
Yeah.
kind of what you don't buy into the dichotomy. Say that emotions are part of your thinking, or emotions need to be considered, and your reason needs to be considered. Like, you don't treat it in a vacuum. You have to keep in mind the whole context of what you are, the whole of what your mind is, the whole of who you are. Emotions are part of that. Your reasoning is part of that.
I'm wondering if have you read Crime and Punishment, by the way?
The first two chapters,
The
I kind
first.
of a few months ago, I've been meaning to read more of it, but I thought it's pretty cool to read. Very interesting.
Yeah. And I'm trying to, because he's in such he gets into this like twisted, tortured state. I don't know how to describe it, but it's like constant back and forth between things he thinks and then feels, and then he's swept up with the emotion, but then he goes back to the thought, and it's like this real chaotic
Yes.
mental state. Super interesting, and I'm wondering if there's nothing in there that's obvious about a reason. Like he doesn't explicitly talk about it, so I'm not
Right.
obviously there's I'm wondering if that is reason. I'm trying to make the connection there. I wonder if that's reason,
I
emotion
mean,
dichotomy too.
I would
I,
say so. The way you describe that sounds very much like that. That's what I'm trying to describe in a way, actually.
but he's not usually questioning what's the right thing because he's fantasizing about committing this murder, and we don't know why because there's all these different possible reasons why. Um, and then he's like he'll just do something and then he'll regret it later, or he'll give a coin to like a beggar or someone who's in a bad place, and then he's like, oh, why did I do that? And then or he'll like feel disgust at the thought of doing something and then he'll just push it away. And I don't know if he doesn't explicitly speak about it, but it's pretty I'm not sure. Maybe that captures some of it. I'm not sure though because it's not clear.
Yeah, that would be the expression of the dichotomy. That you're like in conflict between the two, that they're like two parts of him, like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Like
Right.
he's got his reason, he's got his emotion, and they're like two battling egos within his mind.
Ah,
That they're
Dr.
both like
Jekyll.
vying for attention in a way.
Yeah. Although with him, sometimes his emotions also just invert and change and go with his reason. So it's confusing but
Right. That would be
um,
almost like the helplessness we're talking about. Like what do you even do? Like it's just you don't really know what to do because it all seems just as bad or just as good. Like how do we really know? Like it's just or something to that effect. Like just this real pull within you that you don't know which direction to go.
yeah, that's definitely him. He's like indecisive, and then he's like enough indecision forces decisiveness, but he doesn't know why really. It's confusing. But actually, now that I think about it, maybe it's a reason emotion dichotomy, anytime someone experiences that kind of conflict and doesn't explicitly identify like if there's an emotion, their approach is to if they have conflicting feelings and then the character or person goes through a process of questioning the origin and cause of those feelings, then they don't buy into the reason emotion dichotomy. They have a view that emotion is rooted in reason. But if they are conflicted and push away one or the other, then they're in the reason emotion dichotomy. They don't need to explicitly talk about it that way. But as long as you see any form of repression, now that I think about it, of either the emotion or the thought, then they're in the reason emotion dichotomy. So he is experiencing that dichotomy.
Yeah, he's living it out. Like what we would want to do is integrate them and treat them as both relevant things.
Yeah.
Like your reason helps guide your thinking, but you don't ignore your emotions.
Yeah.
You can't ignore them. You use them together to move forward. You don't like treat them separately. You don't choose one or the other. I mean, of course, you want to listen to reason when you can figure out why are your emotions wrong, what are you responding to, things like that. But you don't just hand wave your emotions away. You have to consider and think about them.
How about remember that little, I don't know if you read it. I sent you that section from Musashi where there's that guy who's like hitting his head against the wall and he's talking about how will he ever be enlightened if he's experiencing these worldly feelings. I guess that would be an example too, right? Because anytime no one is identifying the source of emotions, they're buying into it. So cool.
Yeah, like he's in a way he's like attacking his emotions. Oh, your emotions are evil, you're bad. But also maybe attacking his own thinking. Like, how can you think this? This is why you're hurting yourself. Or I don't know, like he's always in conflict. And to resolve that conflict, you gotta like integrate them. Consider both of them, unify your thinking, integrate the two.
It's basically then almost every character in a lot of books is a concrete reference for the reason emotion dichotomy.
I would say many are.
Yeah.
Very many.
Because there's no how it's a thing that I don't think, unless someone studied, CBT or whatever, like, I don't know if, I think a lot of characters buy into it. Yeah, cool. So I've got heaps of concrete examples then.
Yes.
Right, we can skip that. Okay, let's see what this is. More about determinism. I don't know if you want to get into this necessarily.
No, because I don't even like that as an example of it. But I think you got the idea of the metaphysical helplessness and the reason emotion dichotomy. I think that's more the important point, that this understanding of that conflict.
I'll blow it because I'll come back to it later. Yeah, cool. Where I was going with this one originally was like, because, as a child, you almost form emotions not through, it's like that is the form of determinism, I thought. Like, I do buy into some determinism, I just don't think we're fully determined. But I can come back to that later. Because I think that's an advanced thing, right? It's not free, like, how I think we earlier discussed how much free will do you have is a question in philosophy, so.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's see what the next thing is that I'm highlighting.
The types of materialism, or
no, I skipped. I blued. What I blued, I'll come back to later.
Okay, I see. I got it.
Yeah, and I'm just checking now this next. This is more philosophical, general philosophy question. Like, what? I didn't get all this. Volition is a superhuman faculty injected by God. What's he going on about? To man's earthly identity, as in the Christian identity tradition, then its possession does not make man efficacious or responsible. What does this mean? Like, I didn't know that in religion they think that. I didn't even know they use the word injected, but I didn't know that they think that volition is something, free will is man.
It's just saying volition is granted by God. God gave us free will. So it's taking that idea and what would the implication be then? Having free will does not necessarily make you responsible.
Yeah, I don't see why that doesn't make you efficacious or responsible, and I don't see why it makes it irrelevant to life. Obviously this is not the main point of this chapter, but I'm just curious because I'm doing this to in general to understand how ideas like affect us. So
countries is unique. I mean, I hate to pass on certain things Picasso says, but it doesn't strike me as a very clear example.
okay.
I don't like waving things off from Picasso sometimes, but sometimes I don't think his examples are actually serve to clarify anything, unfortunately. I mean, like any writer, I think you have to sometimes just criticize and just, I'm not sure if we can get anything valuable out of that.
Okay.
I'd have to read the context of where he wrote it, but it seems like he's assuming too much about what that means. We can say that if free will isn't something natural to you, then it's nothing, it's almost irrelevant. If it's something special granted to us, then maybe it's not so much that is a supernatural thing. Like if it's granted by God, is free will is therefore a supernatural thing. There is no identity to it really. It's outside of human understanding in a way. And that's more the issue I think he's trying to point out. The Christian claims free will comes from God. It comes from a supernatural source. It doesn't come from existence.
Yeah, I still don't see how it makes it. It would be, it would just be like Plato arguing that the essence of something comes from another dimension makes, oh, well, actually, I guess that's true. It makes logic irrelevant. But anyway, I still don't see, because if you've been given free will, what difference does it make what the source of it is? So we'd need to, I think maybe we'd need to pick someone's brain who's studied both a lot of religion and philosophy, like Immanuel Kant, because I don't see the connections here. Cool. By the way, I crossed out the next section because we covered that with the sovereign entity thing. I was like, what's the difference between a sovereign entity and a hero? But you said sovereign entity is it's a more a literary term to emphasize the connection between those
I mean, it just
things.
sounds kind of like man is sovereign. Like it's really emphasizing the individuality, I think.
Yeah, cool. Let's close that and we can go to, man, we're making a lot of ground. So the only things I'm stuck with then are just and these are what have held me up the most is the objectivity, reason, and concept formation, which I was like, so those three chapters are like the biggest sinkholes in terms of time and brain power.
Yeah.
So the good, we can maybe do one question from the good. I'm in that file, chapter 7, the good.
Yeah. The good. Okay. Actual subjects.
Okay, so ethics or morality are evaluative and prescriptive. And then, I guess politics, is that evaluative or just prescriptive? Like, is that those branches also the same as ethics in a sense? They're like just applications of ethics?
Yeah, they're more application, I would say. They are normative.
Right.
Yeah, they're normative things. So evaluative would be fair.
Because art, I know we haven't gone to it yet, but art seems like a stretch for philosophy to cover. But I'm interested in, because if philosophy determines what would be good art, then I haven't gotten to that chapter, so maybe it's not fair to say.
Maybe it's more like questioning what does art deal with? It seems to be with aesthetic judgments, whatever you might define those as.
Yeah.
aesthetic, or is that different than, in some ways, evaluative, but it's a bit weird, I guess you could say. It's a little different than both ethics and epistemology. It's not really either, I would say.
Uh,
But yeah, it warrants an application of certain ethical and epistemological principles.
okay.
Same with politics, being like you have to first understand what our nature is before you prescribe how we ought to live in a society.
Yeah. Right.
That sort of thing. Such a code. Ethics is the code. What code should he live by? Yes. How were these questions formulated?
Yeah, like obviously, now that I remember our discussion previously, this book is organized in a logical hierarchy, not necessarily a chronological hierarchy with which you'd actually learn the subject. Because I'm like, you don't start from for what end man should live by what fundamental, like how would you even know to formulate those questions? By what fundamental principle should he act in order to achieve this end? Who should profit? Like, I mean, I get maybe you in this book you're starting from these questions now because we discussed this previously, but when I looked at this, I was like, how do you even start from, like, how do you know those are the questions to ask? At least it wasn't obvious to me. Like, it's
Same with
definitely,
these basic interrelated questions. I think
these are
just
the,
describing what the questions of ethics, whether or not you know to start from there is a separate issue. You could start by asking, like, could be as simple as asking, you find yourself asking, why am I going to work today? Or what job am I going to apply to? You'll have to broaden it more, of course, and ask, like, well, what's the point? Why do I even act anyway? What should even happen when I act? Like, it's just
why
something that
should I?
grows out of your own experiences, and you start to question what you've gone through, and then you can realize, oh, that's ethics. That's answering these questions that I just came up with. That would be ethics.
Right.
Like, you
And
might not start there, of course, as a kid, but yeah.
Yeah, sorry, you might not start there.
These questions, what?
Yeah, so I guess you're saying these questions are like condensed versions or in abstractions, more. I don't know how to say it, but like questions abstracted away from the questions you ask every day, all day, and if you keep following the lead of those questions, you'd get down to this thing like, what should I live for?
Yes, this is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, okay. Who should profit from my actions is tricky though. I don't see how I get there as well.
It's hard, like you say, like, oh, why do you get up in the morning? Because I feel like I need things to do. It's like, well, why do you feel that way? Why does it matter if you feel that? Like, or you could say, I need to get up because um, my mom needs me to deliver her groceries today. It's like, well, why are you doing it for her? Is there a reason? You should, like, you could ask yourself, like, does it matter what she wants, or things like that? You could eventually ask.
Yeah, I can sort of see that. I mean, if I had more specifics in mind, like I'll think about it more. If I had more, I can, or when I get further into ethics, I might start getting how like, oh, it's so obvious, but right now it's not.
Would that be in a way a matter of reduction, in a way that we're trying to reduce these questions to something more direct and everyday?
Yeah.
And that's kind of what